my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm going to cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is sponsored by Mountain Meadow Herbs. Help prepare your body for birth with their leading herbal birth prep supplement called Gentle Birth. Gentle Birth is a midwife-approved, time-tested liquid herbal formula that more than 100,000 women have chosen to help prepare their bodies for birth. Gentle Birth is a perfect blend of herbs formulated with the wisdom of Amish midwifery like red raspberry leaf, milk thistle, wild yam root, and 9 more thoughtfully blended herbs known to help lessen labor pains, improve uterine muscle tone, manage bleeding, and even ease you and baby into nursing by reducing postpartum letdown. Trusted for over 20 years and earning thousands of rave reviews and testimonials from midwives and mothers alike, Gentle Birth is Mountain Meadow Herbs' signature product. But they also have a full range of herbal remedies for all your family's needs, from infants to adults of all ages. Find out more at mmherbs.com and take advantage of this special offer by using the code BIRTHHOUR for 10% off and free shipping on your first order. That's BIRTHHOUR at mmherbs.com. At the end of this episode, I talk with Nicole. She works at Mountain Meadow Herbs and also took the Gentle Birth supplement during her last pregnancy. So stay tuned for that conversation. Before we get to today's birth story, I want to talk a little bit about our online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options, and this is the course you've been looking for if you just have that gut feeling that you know you should be taking a childbirth course, but maybe the one that's being offered to you by your care provider is not exactly what you're looking for. It might be more catered towards the type of birth they want you to have versus making you informed of all your different options and how to address different things that happen in birth, because as this podcast has shown us, birth is very unpredictable. So we would love to have you check out our 12-module course. You can go to thebirthhour.com/course to see detailed outlines of what is included in the course. You will also get a bonus course called Beyond the First Latch that is an additional 6 modules all about pumping, feeding your baby, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan. And we have a special coupon code for you. It's 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. And last thing before we get to the episode, we also want to share that we have a Patreon page. This has been going for about 7 years now, and it's a place where you can support the Birth Hour, but you get fun perks in return, like access to over 600 additional birth stories that are not in your main podcast feed, and of course, membership in our private Facebook group at the $5 a month or more level. This is the best place on the internet. You hear people talk about it a lot on the podcast. It's a great place to get support, find friendship, get questions answered, and connect over our love of birth stories. So check that out at patreon.com/birthhour. Today's birth story guest is Sierra, and she has 2 home birth stories to share with us. She had an accidental unassisted home birth with her first, but the midwife made it in time for her second. She does mention her miscarriage between those 2 births, so just be aware of that going into listening to this. I also want to mention that her partner shared their perspective of the birth story on our partner podcast back in 2020. And you can listen to that by becoming a Patreon member at the $10 a month level. We have an entire collection of partner podcasts that you can listen to there. All right, let's get to Sierra's story. Hi, Sierra. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Hi, Bryn. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to have you share your stories. Before we get to that, can you tell us a little bit about you and your family?
Yeah. So my name is Sierra. My pronouns are she and her. And I've been with my spouse, Jason. Their pronouns are they, them. And we've been together for about 8 years. We have 2 kids, a 7-year-old and a recent 4-year-old. And we live in central South Carolina. The stories that you'll hear today took place in Kentucky. That's a little bit relevant just based on some of the laws in Kentucky surrounding home birth at the time. But that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Yeah. My husband recorded with Jason on the Partner podcast back in 2020. So we've heard the stories from their point of view. And I'm really excited to link back to that and then to get your perspective today. So let's go ahead and just start with finding out you're pregnant and how your pregnancy went.
Yeah. So I had an IUD and I got that taken out in April of 2016. We knew we wanted to start a family, so we started trying pretty much immediately. And I actually got pregnant in May of 2016. So the first try we got pregnant. And funny story, before I took a pregnancy test, we were out shopping and we were at Half Price Books. And I just got this overwhelming feeling that I was about to pass out. And so I laid down on the floor of the Half Price Books and was just like, what is happening to me? Like this, I've never felt this bad in my entire life. Like something must be terribly wrong. And then 2 days later, I got a positive pregnancy test. So that.
Wow, it's an interesting first symptom for sure. Not great.
Yeah, I was exhausted. I was nauseous. I was like, something is wrong. But we had also been in the process of moving in together. So we thought it would take a little bit longer to get pregnant. So I was like, well, we'll get our IUD out when we move in together. And then we'll spend a few months trying to get pregnant. But it happened pretty quickly. And then my pregnancy, aside from nausea, was pretty uneventful. No major health concerns or anything. And I did decide pretty early on that I was going to have a home birth. I had watched, as a lot of people do, The Business of Being Born when I was in college. And I thought that sounds like a good place to start. And then I'm also a survivor of sexual assault. And I thought if I'm in the hospital and somebody tries to tell me what to do or tries to touch me without my permission, like that's not going to be a positive experience for me or anybody in the room. And so I knew that I wanted to have a home birth pretty early on. So I called the first midwife and she was like, hey, I'm actually pregnant too. And so I don't think that this is going to work, but she's who I wanted. Like at the time, if you Googled Homebirth Kentucky, she's the person that would pop up like #1 in the Google search. And actually a few years later, our kids actually ended up going to preschool together and they were indeed born a week apart. So it definitely wouldn't have worked to have her as my midwife. So I went on and I researched a few more options and eventually settled on the midwife that I went with. I went with her for a couple of reasons. But one of the primary reasons that I chose the midwife that I did for my first birth was that she had a backup midwife. And most home birth midwives do have an assistant that comes to the birth. But the positive part for me was that this assistant that came to the birth was actually a midwife who was able to practice out of a hospital as well, which in Kentucky at the time was incredibly rare because you couldn't be a certified professional midwife and also work out of a hospital, and you couldn't be a certified nurse midwife and do home births. But this midwife, this backup midwife, actually had both certifications, so she could do both. And I thought, like, this is my first birth. If we have anything go wrong, like, I want to be able to transfer to a hospital easily. And so that was the primary motivation for me choosing the midwife that I did. A little bit more from the pregnancy. I felt awful the whole time. I really didn't enjoy being pregnant, and I didn't take a lot of photos during pregnancy just because I was like, I don't want to remember this. I was actually talking to my mom. My mom has 5 kids, and she had said, with all of my boys, it was like carrying a basketball, like just a basketball in front of you. And with all my girls, I just had a really fat ass. I was like, okay, Mom. And so I sent her a picture and she said, oh, it looks like you're having a girl.
Oh, nice.
I know. I was like, okay. So we had visits with my midwife like once a month until the 3rd trimester. And then it went to every 2 weeks. And then, past 36 weeks, it's once a week. But I had said the whole time, like this baby's going to be born early. And I think that the labor is going to be pretty quick. And my midwife she didn't brush off those concerns, but she was like, well, you're a first-time mom. That's really unlikely to happen. And I said, well, my mom has 5 kids and all of us were born at 37 weeks and she had precipitous labors with all 5 of us. So like maybe there's something to consider there. And I felt kind of brushed off in that. Some notable moments that I think just influenced the labor and the birth and the postpartum. At one of our first visits, I had talked about like the experience of getting my IUD and how painful that had been. And I was like, are labor contractions anything like that? And my midwife had said, maybe what you experienced was similar to an early labor contraction, but definitely not active labor. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And that's stuck in my mind. Like, in order for me to be in active labor, it has to be more painful than when I got my IUD. And then at 36 weeks, I had a visit with both of the midwives, so my primary midwife and the backup. And I had said, what if I can't make any milk, right? Like a really, not a legitimate concern, because that's really uncommon, but a concern that I had. Like, what if I can't breastfeed, all of this? And the backup midwife reached into my shirt and squeezed my nipple without telling me that she was going to do that. She just like pulled my shirt down, squeezed my nipple, and like milk came out. And I was like, okay, well, this isn't a concern. But I also was like, what did you just do?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I through the whole thing, like, I really enjoyed the experience with my primary midwife, but her backup midwife, I was like, I picked her because I might need to go to the hospital and I want that peace of mind. But the whole time I felt kind of disrespected and a little like my concerns aren't being heard by this person. At 37 weeks, I had my 37-week appointment. And this appointment, both of the midwives came to my house for the home visit. And they asked me if I wanted a cervical check, which I agreed to. And they did the cervical check, and the midwife said, oh, maybe a fingertip. And they kind of looked at each other and like exchanged this look like, oh, ha, she thinks she's going to have this baby early, but she's not even dilated at all. So I just felt like really silly. Like, I think that things are going to start happening and nobody's really listening to me. And then at 38 weeks is when I stopped working. So I turned 38 weeks on a Monday, and I was like, this is my last day of work. Thank God. I worked in like food service, retail. And so I was on my feet like 6 to 8 hours a day, every day. And I was just so tired. And I thought, like, if this baby is going to come late, like everybody's telling me, like, maybe I could at least get some good sleep in before that happens, right? Fast forward, that is not what happened. I went home from work on Monday, did my normal routine, got in bed, and then maybe about 15 minutes after laying down, my water broke. And it was like a big pop and then a gush. So there was no like, is it my water? Is it not? Like, it definitely was. Like, you could hear it like a balloon popping. So I called my midwife. She asked me to send her a picture of the water to make sure that there was, no meconium in it or anything. It kind of just looked like clearish, liquidy discharge with a little bit of like blood tinge in it. And she was like, great, do your best to rest, take a Benadryl and go to sleep. And so that's what I did. I laid down around 10:30 to go to sleep, and I slept like I was dead until probably 7 the next morning. I remember maybe having some contractions through the night, but nothing that really woke me up. And I thought, well, I guess I'm having a baby tomorrow. So I woke up, I checked in with the midwife. She was like, you're going to want to rest. If you can get a nap in, that's great. But once labor starts, like, there's no stopping it. And so you don't need to like get excited and like run up and down the stairs, because that's just going to wear you out. So just try to relax as much as you can. And so that's what I did. I watched Netflix all day. I hung out with my dog. My Boston Terrier was very worried about me because I think he knew something was going on. So I snuggled with my dog and I watched Netflix. So it was maybe around 3:00 that day. My midwife was like, I'm just going to come check on you in person and see what's going on. She got to my house around 3. She asked if I wanted a cervical check, and I said no, just because I had felt so silly that first time, and it was painful. I didn't want to have to do that again. And she asked me, like, were you able to nap or anything like that? And I was like, no, I've just been like relaxing and watching Netflix. And at that point, I'd been having contractions all morning, but they were probably 10 minutes apart, and they weren't very strong. Or I thought that they weren't very strong, because in my mind, I was thinking, this has to be more painful than an IUD for it to be labor. And my midwife looked at me before she left, and she said, if you're going to have a baby today, you need to decide that you're having a baby today. And I was like, oh, okay. But in my mind, I was thinking like, well, all you've told me to do this whole time is like relax and take a nap and, take a bath, or just like try to rest as much as you can, because labor will start regardless and you're not going to be able to stop it at that point, right? And Jason actually told me later that she had pulled them aside and said, if things progress the way that they're progressing, you'll have a baby probably at this time tomorrow. So she was expecting me to be in labor for a full 24 more hours at that point. So she left and she told me to follow the 5-1-1 rule, like contractions 5 minutes apart, lasting a minute for an hour. So call her when that happened. And I said, okay. And I decided, I guess I'm going to have a baby today. So I had Jason make me a snack. I had some eggs and toast. I did not finish my eggs and toast. And I was just feeling kind of defeated and kind of grumpy. You've told me to rest. You've told me to nap. You've told me to do all these things. And now you're telling me it's my fault that labor is not progressing, or at least that's how I felt about that interaction. And my doula, I did have a doula. She lived about an hour away. And so I was maybe we should call her just in case and have her come. So it's not too late. Because at that point it was about 4:00. And if it's going to take her an hour to get there, I didn't want her to get stuck in rush hour traffic and not be there for another 2 hours when I could have needed her. So she came to the house and I was having more intense contractions, but they were still 7 to 10 minutes apart. And my doula kept telling me that I was doing a great job. And she was telling me to breathe and all of this stuff. And I was so annoyed. And I know a lot of people in labor could use that encouragement. But looking back, I think about how I've handled pain at every other point in my life. And I don't want anybody to touch me. I don't want anybody to talk to me. I kind of want to just muscle through it. And it was the same for me in labor. I was you're telling me I'm doing a good job, but all that's doing is distracting me. And I didn't say that. I just said, I think I'm going to get in the shower. And I got in the shower mostly to avoid everybody perceiving me. I was my doula is watching me, giving me this encouragement. My partner, Jason, is incredible, but they're also concerned and watching me labor. And I was I can't be perceived anymore. I need to just go do this on my own. So I got in the shower, I think around 5:30, and my contractions were still 7 minutes apart, but they were definitely getting more intense. And again, I was this is not more intense than the IUD, so I must not be in labor. And I remember thinking in the shower, if I'm not even in active labor yet, I'm not going to be able to do this. So I think I was in the shower for almost an hour. I got out of the shower around 6:00, and I had a contraction that just completely took my breath away. And I announced to the room, I said, I need to relax. I have to find some relief from this. But again, it was not more painful than my IUD. So there's some foreshadowing. Looking back, I know that this was the start of transition. But at the time I was this is the first contraction that's really read as painful to me instead of just intense or full of pressure. And so I got into bed, and pretty much as soon as I laid down, I was I need to push. And my doula was every first-time mom feels they need to push, but I'll call your midwife. I was okay, whatever. And I really didn't believe myself at that point. I was my doula is telling me that every first-time mom feels they need to push before they need to push. This hasn't really been as intense as I thought that it was going to be. And it has just become more painful than when I got my IUD, which I thought was this is the beginning of active labor. And then my doula called the midwife, and my midwife was well, don't push. I'm on my way. But there's nothing to worry about. Even if you are pushing, usually a first-time mom will push for about an hour. And I was okay. And I tried not to push as much as I could. And that made me feel I was going to die. I had a contraction where I was actively fighting the urge to push. And that contraction finished. And I looked at Jason straight in the eyes, and I said, I love you. Because in my head, I was I'm actually about to die. And I want the last thing that I say to be, I love you, to my partner.
Aww.
I know. I was so certain. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, except that I was definitely, it was over for me. Right. It made me so angry that I was being told not to push, but I really needed to. And I was you know what, if I'm going to die anyway, I might as well not be in as much pain as I'm in right now. And I decided I'm going to not fight this urge anymore. I'm just going to go for it, and whatever happens, happens. So I got on all fours, and I was having a contraction. I definitely was pushing at this point. And as happens, I pooped on the bed, right? And my doula at that point was oh no, you're pushing. And I'm yes. And so I was on all fours, maybe for 2 contractions. I don't know. And I was like, I'm going to check out what's going on for myself. And so I put my hand down between my legs to see, like, is anything going on? Can I feel anything? And my baby's head was right there. So I was crowning, but I just had no awareness of that because all I could focus on was like how good it felt to push after being told not to. And I was like, oh, that's the baby's head. And so I sat up sort of on my knees, and it was that motion of like pulling my body up that pushed the baby the rest of the way out. And so all told, from the moment that I got out of the shower to the baby being born was about 14 minutes. So 6:15 to 6:29 was when she was born. And luckily, Jason was right there the whole time and was able to catch our daughter as she came out because I was not really like able to do that. And everybody was shocked. I was like, I just had a baby. And my partner was like, you just had a baby. And my doula called my midwife and said, hey, the baby's here. And the midwife, you could hear her over the phone. Like she was not on speaker, but she yelled, oh, shit. And she was like, well, I'm still 45 minutes away. And I was like, okay, well, we'll just be here, I guess. And my doula had 2 home births at this point. So like she wasn't a medical professional, but she also wasn't completely ignorant to what could happen. So she was really helpful. Like I laid down, put the baby on me. Her cord was super, super short. So I couldn't even pull her up to my chest. She was kind of like laying between my thigh and my belly button. And we like wrapped her up and we just looked at each other. And I was pretty much in shock until the midwife got there because I was like, what did I just do? And I was worried, like, what if something had been wrong? Or like, what if there was an emergency and there was nobody here? But thankfully, everything was fine. So my midwife got there, did all the normal stuff. So like cut the cord, weighed the baby, all of that. And then the backup midwife got there and they did the heel prick for like the newborn screen. And my daughter just started crying because that's what happens. And she was crying so loud and her mouth was open, like really wide. And the midwife said like, oh, this baby doesn't have a tongue tie. Spoiler, she did have a tongue tie and breastfeeding was a nightmare.
Oh no.
So, but all of that, like all of these small comments that this midwife had made through the pregnancy made me really feel like I don't know what's going on with my body. I don't know what's going on with my baby. Like I must be wrong at just about everything. So breastfeeding was really hard. And I told the midwives that first night when they were there, I was like, this doesn't really feel right. And they were like, well, some pain is common. And I was like, it doesn't feel like my nipples are getting used to this. Like this feels very painful. And they're like, well, your nipples look fine. The baby's anatomy looks fine. Like you're fine. You just need to get used to it. And so for the first like 4 to 6 weeks of feeding my daughter, I would just cry every time I had to breastfeed because it was so painful. And it wasn't creating a lot of like nipple damage. So I didn't have cracked or bleeding nipples or anything like that. But every time she latched, like it felt like somebody was pinching me like over and over. And eventually like we figured it out and we ended up nursing for over 2 years, which was really rewarding. But it was a lot more painful than it needed to be. And I attribute that to what that midwife had said, just making me feel like I didn't know what was going on. And when we took our daughter, her name is Dottie, when we took her into her first like dentist appointment when she was around 2 years old, the dentist immediately identified a tongue tie. Was like, oh, she's got a tongue tie. How is breastfeeding for you?
Oh.
And I was like, oh, it was terrible. Thanks for the validation. Yeah, but that's all I'll say on that. And then I had also struggled a lot with my mental health, not just after having the baby, but my whole life. And so postpartum was really difficult. I didn't feel disconnected from my daughter, but I felt like she was kind of an alien. Like I loved her and I was so excited she was there, but I was like, this is weird. Like it feels very strange just to have this whole other person in our house. We also didn't have a lot of support. So like my family doesn't live close by. Jason's family didn't live very close. And so we didn't have a lot of people visiting us or anything like that. I feel like I lived off of like those Totino's party pizzas, you know, the ones that cost $2.50.
Yeah.
Because that's what I could put into the oven while holding a baby. So I felt really isolated and like really sad and really alone until I went back to work. And I was around people and I could talk to adults, which was incredible. But yeah, I took about 8 weeks off of work and I just felt like a zombie the whole time. But because of that experience and because I wanted to be a better parent to my daughter, I was like, well, I'm going to figure out this mental health stuff, right? And I started taking Zoloft when she was about a year old, which helped tremendously. And when it came time to get pregnant again, I talked to the midwife and she was like, you know, we could taper down your dose. You could go off of it completely, but it sounds like maybe you're somebody that should keep taking it. Like potentially the benefits to you taking this medicine is going to outweigh the risks. And I completely agreed. So anybody who's like afraid to take their very necessary medication through pregnancy, like talk to your medical provider. But for me, I definitely needed it and I'm still taking it. So there's no right choice for everybody, but there is a right choice for you.
Yeah.
So trying to get pregnant again, this was early 2019. We again got pregnant our first try with our second pregnancy. And that pregnancy actually ended in a first trimester loss. So no real birth story to share with that one, but I just couldn't do this podcast without acknowledging that baby.
Yeah.
So we decided she was a girl. We don't know that for sure, but she was due in December. And so we named her Noelle, and I have a little tattoo to commemorate her. But we did have a second pregnancy that ended in a loss. And a couple of months later, like once my cycles had evened out again, we got pregnant with our second baby, Elwood.
Okay. Yeah. Another home birth, right?
Yes, another home birth and also completely different from the first.
Okay.
So really easy pregnancy, didn't feel like shit the whole time, kind of loved being pregnant with him to the point where I would come home from work and I just felt like very sexy. And I would like put on my lingerie and just lounge around the house with my pregnant belly. Like, this is the most beautiful I've ever been in my life.
Love it.
So we have a lot more pictures from that second pregnancy than from with Dottie's. And this time, the original midwife that I had called, the one that was pregnant when I was pregnant the first time, we went with her. And I kind of want to stress, like, I loved my midwife with my first child, but she lived an hour away. And I thought, if I have to deal with the backup midwife again, I'm not going to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. So we went with the original midwife because her office was really close to our house. Like, I knew she could get there quickly. And her backup midwife was my first midwife.
Oh, nice.
So it's a very small circle, but I knew the whole care team. So really uneventful pregnancy. I was like, this baby's going to be early. And so I stopped working at 37 weeks instead of 38 because I thought, like, there's no way I'm going to go past my first birth. So I stopped working at 37 weeks. 38 weeks came and went. And I went in for my 39-week appointment on a Thursday. And at that point, I was 39 weeks and 2 days. And I was just like, okay, well, I guess I'll see you next week. Because I just had given up on this baby coming. And my midwife was like feeling around. And she was like, oh, well, I think he's posterior. And so maybe like go home and do these like exercises, like flip yourself upside down, essentially. And, you know, maybe he'll flip around and that'll make him come. It's like, okay, I'll do that. So I had been waking up every night around 2 or 3 in the morning with like really intense Braxton Hicks contractions. And I would get up and I'd go to the bathroom. And by the time I was done peeing, the contraction would be over and I could go right back to sleep. But on this night, I woke up. I was having a contraction, what I assumed was a Braxton Hicks contraction. And I went and I used the bathroom. And when I finished peeing, the contraction was still happening. And I was like, this is a real one. So I immediately called my midwife and I was like, hey, just had a real contraction. And she was like, great, it's 3 a.m. Like, try to go back to sleep. When things get more intense, like, let me know and I'll come by. And so I did. I tried to get back into bed. And just to set the scene for y'all, it's March 13th of 2020. So Friday, March 13th, 2020. And I get into bed and I'm like, let me turn on Netflix. And it was like, I don't know what I was watching, but it was like these doomsday preppers.
Oh my gosh.
Who like have these bunkers that you can live in for 2 or 3 years, like, and never have to see the outside. And I was like, oh, who could ever need that? That's so silly. But during the course of watching this, I continued to have contractions and I was like, okay, like, it's go time. And so I got up. I just texted my midwife and said, like, hey, I'm not going to be able to sleep, but I'll let you know when things get more intense and have you come by. And so the way that this labor went is I would have a contraction and then I would go have diarrhea and then I would rest for a minute and then I would have another contraction and then I would go have diarrhea and then I would rest for another minute. And so that was pretty much the whole labor. But it was probably 4 a.m. and I am in the living room and it's dark outside, but we have like this soft, warm light from our lamps. And I smell coffee. I'm like, what's happening? And Jason comes in and was like, hey, I brewed some coffee. I know you don't want any, but I thought you might really like the smell. And I was like, I really do. So I'm like in labor land and like there's this beautiful coffee smell and like this soft, warm lighting and I'm just having a great time. And then I had a contraction where I was like, things might be starting to pick up. So I called my midwife back and she was like, cool, I'll be right there. And she walked into my house like 2 minutes later. And she lives not super close, maybe like a 15, 20 minute drive from my house. But I was like, has it been 20 minutes? And she was like, oh, no. I came and parked on your street the first time you called me and was just waiting for you to call me again. Because she knew that I had like this trauma from my first birth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really sweet.
I love that. I feel like midwives just had that intuition too. Like my midwife did that for me with my third, but didn't tell me because they don't want to put pressure on you. But yeah, so smart.
Yeah. She also said that midwives have a saying, and I don't know if this is true, but she said midwives say never trust a second-time mom. Which I think is so funny because all the birth stories I've heard, it's like your first is your longest labor and then your second is just like, bam, here's a baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think my body was waiting for her to be there because as soon as she got there, my contractions were 3 minutes apart. And at this point, I'm like sort of dancing around the living room and my partner said, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your pain? And I'm thinking back to my first birth and I was like, well, is a 10 certain death? And they were like, yeah, a 10 is certain death. And I said, I don't know, maybe a 5. So at some point I have this contraction and it's the same mindset that I had with the first, where I was like, oh, if I have to keep doing this, I'm not going to be able to do this. And so I turned to my partner and I said, can you go turn on the shower? And so they left to turn on the shower. And while they're gone, I have a contraction and I looked at my midwife and I said, that one was different. And she said, okay. And she got up and went to wash her hands. And this next part is all like one contraction. So she gets up to go wash her hands. I start having a contraction where I'm like, this is intense. And my partner walks back into the living room and my water breaks. And it's like in the movies where it's like a huge pop and just gushes all over the floor. And in my head, I'm thinking like, well, I've heard after your water breaks, things get much more intense, but I'm still having this same contraction. So my partner walks back to the bathroom to get the midwife to say like, hey, her water broke. And by the time the midwife walked from the bathroom to the living room, my son's head was born. So his head was out. And that was all one contraction, which maybe lasted a minute. So she crouches down beside me and she's like, hey, like this next push, his body's going to come out. And I was like, okay. And I could tell that his shoulders were like enormous. So I'm like prepping for that. And I push and, the baby comes out and Jason catches the baby. And the midwife says, all right, well, you can pass him to Sierra whenever she's ready. and I'm exhausted and I just go, I'm not ready. And I feel like I sat there for 5 minutes, but it was probably only 30 seconds where I was like, I've just done this Herculean task and I cannot now hold a baby and walk to the bedroom. But I did. So they passed the baby to me. We went into the bedroom and laid down on the bed and, cut the cord and delivered the placenta and snuggled for a little bit, which was great. So she gave us probably about 30 to 45 minutes where it was just like the three of us cuddling in the bed. And then she's like, well, now we need to see, like, do you need stitches or any of that? And I did end up needing stitches. I had 7 stitches with my first. I don't know how many I had with my second. But while I'm getting the stitches, I'm like laying in the bed with my knees up and my daughter walks in and she's 3 years old and she looks around the room and she said, oh, the baby's here. And we said, yeah, the baby's here. And then she looks at me, she's really concerned and she goes, is your vulva okay?
Aw.
And we had prepped her for the birth. So we had watched like some birth videos and I had told her like, mama might make these noises and that's okay. And if it's scary, like you can go somewhere else. But like, I'm just working really hard to get a baby out. And so thankfully, like she didn't wake up during the birth, but she did wake up while I was getting stitches. And for weeks afterwards, she would like snuggle the baby and then she would remember and she'd look at me and go, is your vulva better? Yes, it's better. Thank you.
You're like, it's been better, but
yeah,
it's doing okay. Aw.
And then compared to postpartum with the first, like the second one was a breeze. Like you always hear, oh, like an unmedicated birth, you're like up and walking around afterwards. That was not my experience with my first. Like I felt like I had gotten hit by a truck. But with this one, and Elwood was 2 pounds more than Dottie, I felt great. So he was born at like 5:50 in the morning. I'd been in labor for right at 3 hours. And I was like up walking around, like making food, doing all the things within a couple of days. And then we had our little like COVID bubble. So it was just the 4 of us, me, my 2 kids, and Jason for like the first however long. I think I took 12 weeks off of work and then went back to work and we kept our bubble. He was born on Friday and the governor of Kentucky had said like, y'all have the weekend, but on Monday it's essential travel only. Mm-hmm. And so our family had said, we really want to come, but this COVID thing, we just don't know what's going on. And, we have elderly family members. So like, let's wait the 3 weeks that we have these orders. And then,
right.
Maybe we'll do something in a couple of months. That turned into 14 months.
Yeah.
So Elwood was born in March of 2020. He didn't meet any of his family until May of 2021.
Wow.
So he was already walking.
Yeah.
But it was a really sweet, like postpartum. Mentally and emotionally and physically, I was much better the second time around. Mm-hmm. And we had our whole little family and it was just like the sweetest time. And then breastfeeding him, he latched the first time and I was like, oh, this is what breastfeeding is supposed to feel like no issues at all. And he was just like the chillest baby. And my midwife said, she was like, yeah, second babies tend to know that they're the second. And I thought that was so funny. So yeah, I think those are my 2 home birth stories. Pretty different overall, but I think if I had any advice to give to anybody like who's pregnant and expecting right now, it would be like, you know your body and you know your baby better than anybody else. And like, don't let anybody, even if it's a medical professional, tell you that like you don't know what's going to be best for you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good advice for sure. And carries over into motherhood when you're taking care of these babies. So I feel like I really found that after my first birth as well. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, any resources you want to share?
Yeah. So for home birth specifically, I found The Birth Partner to be a really great book. It has all the things that your partner might need to know as they're supporting you through the birth. And then I don't know how many people are like me out there, but I read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth and I was like, I don't care. Like the birth affirmations and your body was made to do this, like none of that resonates with me. I'm not that kind of person. I really need to know like what is happening And so I read the Mayo Clinic Guide to a Healthy Pregnancy, and that gets very like clinical and like, this is exactly what your body is going through at every stage. And so that was like the most helpful pregnancy guide that I found. And then the Freedom Mom Peri bottle. Mm-hmm. Everybody has to have that. I find that most of their products are kind of gimmicky. It is what it is. But that one changed my life, especially after the experience of having the first baby and being like, I have no idea how to do this.
Yeah.
Because nobody really prepares you for like using the bathroom after you have a baby. But that Freedom Mom Peri bottle is top notch.
Yeah. And I think there's different versions of it as well. Like you just want to make sure you get one that has the inverted spray.
Yep.
If you're looking on Amazon or whatever. I have a friend who just like keeps them in all their bathrooms now to use on like toddler butts. So
yes, they come in handy for so many different things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, cool. And then what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah. So I'm in the Birth Hour Patrons Facebook group, so you can find me there.
Yes.
You can also add me on Facebook if you want. I'm on Instagram at Sierra the Lynch. And then you can also email me if you want. It's sierrathelynch@gmail.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing, Sierra.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
All right, now I'm going to chat with Nicole from Mountain Meadow Herbs about their Gentle Birth supplement. And remember, you can use the coupon code BIRTHHOUR at mmherbs.com. Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for coming on the Birth Hour today to chat with me about Mountain Meadow Herbs.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm really excited to hear more about Gentle Birth from Mountain Meadow Herbs. But before we get to that, can you tell listeners just a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, sure. As you said, my name is Nicole. I have worked for Mountain Meadow Herbs for the past 10 years. Actually, no, it's 12 years.
Oh, wow.
So it's been a long time.
Yeah.
I have 2 children and a husband and a couple dogs and turtles. So
Nice. Full house.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, cool. Well, can you tell us a little bit about your pregnancy and why you decided to try the Gentle Birth Prep supplement?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I'm a pretty health conscious person, especially working in the natural supplement industry for such a long time. Like I've mentioned, working at Mountain Meadow Herbs. And here we work with a lot of midwives. So I was like, hey, I want to have a midwife. So I got one. And then I wanted to plan out this all natural water birth for my first pregnancy. I ended up having a really good pregnancy up until about the birth time. The birth experience was nothing like I had ever experienced before. I don't know if it's just because it was my first time having a child, but the pain was awful. Active labor was not fun at all. The birth went well, but in the end, like the healing process was not easy. I had a hard time getting around the next few days because of all the different birthing positions I was in. And, you're using different muscles that you didn't even know you had, basically.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I got hit by a bus and my emotions were all over the place. So it was a pretty rough time. So with all of that being said, that's why I was like, oh, I know about this gentle birth. I'm going to take it this next pregnancy. And so that's what I did because I was like, well, why not?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Why not? Especially
Why not?
working there, and I'm sure hearing many positive stories from people that had used it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about what Gentle Birth was designed to do and how it supported you?
Yeah, so it's supposed to make the birthing process easier. And that's actually exactly what it did for me because I did take it for my second child. It helps with the healing process. It's just supposed to make the overall birthing experience a lot easier for women.
And it's a liquid supplement. So how do you use it? Like how long and when did you start it and all of that?
Yes, it is a liquid formula, and you want to take it about 5 weeks before your anticipated due date. You take it a couple times a day for the first 3 weeks, and then the last couple weeks you take it 3 times a day.
Can you share any specific benefits or effects that you feel like you experienced with using it?
Yes, I'm comparing this to the first birth where I had no medication. I didn't take anything,
Right.
and my pain was extremely high. So for the birth that I did take it, I was shopping when I went into labor, and I was about an hour away from my house, and then my house was like an hour away from where I was going to have my baby. So I had no pain with my contractions or anything like that. My midwife couldn't even tell that I was having contractions because I was so relaxed. And then the healing process was a complete night and day difference from my first birth. I was able to walk around like nothing happened after, to the point where my family was like, hey, you should probably sit down. And I was like, no, I'm good. I'm fine. This is nothing. And then my hormones were actually like normal. I wasn't like all over the place like I was the first time around. So it was just a completely different experience.
That's really great. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the things that are in it, like red raspberry leaf tea and things like that, are things that we, have heard about before as far as uterine prep and all of that in late pregnancy. So I love that this is all in a easy tincture type formula. And I know that on the website it talks about, even making a tea out of the gentle birth formula, which is a great idea as well.
Yeah, and if that's the way people want to take it, that's perfect, as long as you're taking it.
Yeah. So it sounds like it really made a difference for you. Do you recommend it to a lot of other expecting moms?
Oh, yeah, every one of them. I mean, I'd absolutely recommend it, and I do, to my friends and family.
Yeah. Well, what do you say to people who maybe aren't familiar with different herbs and tinctures and that kind of thing and aren't really sure about taking something like this?
I would say definitely do your research. If you're not really familiar with herbs, look into them, and you can actually see how beneficial they can be for you. If you're skeptical about it, I would just take it, because I was kind of on the fence for my first birth, and that's why I didn't take it. And I regretted that. So I did take it the second time, and it made a huge difference. If there's something that can change your birthing experience for the better, you might as well do it, because birth is hard enough. Make it a better experience if you can.
Yeah, birth is so unpredictable, but I feel like, at least for me, the having things to do, especially in the third trimester, that, might help, were always really encouraging, whether it was red raspberry leaf tea or like eating dates and
anything,
primrose oil, all
helpful.
those things. I'm like, sign me up for anything that might make a difference.
Yes.
Yeah. And I love that, some of these herbs, there's good research behind, how they can kind of prepare the uterus and things like that. And you guys have a lot of great information on your website as well to kind of explain things a little bit as well.
Yeah, we do.
Well, I'm glad to talk to someone who not only works for Mountain Meadow Herbs, but also used it for their own pregnancy and birth experience. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much again to Sierra for sharing her stories with us, and to Mountain Meadow Herbs for sponsoring this episode. Remember, you can use the coupon Birth Hour for 10% off on their website. I will link to that on the show notes and in the podcast app where you're listening to this. And you can find the show notes by heading to thebirthhour.com and just searching for Sierra's name in the search bar.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.